So I've been listening to the podcast of Joe Rogan with Björn Lomborg. Uh,
Is he an environmentalist, I think, or no?
yeah, he's someone who talks about the challenging that we are facing in terms of environment, but he has a voice that I find measured.
Yeah.
So he really stresses the fact that we shouldn't probably consider things so negatively all the time, and that when we are identifying problems, we should tackle solutions that make sense and are easy to implement instead of being very excited in doing things so-called perfectly
Yeah.
and putting together solutions that are, at the end of the day, the better can be the enemy of good.
Yeah, there's a level of anxiety that can weaken a community and the mindset. So, absolutely. I think sometimes some of the fear mongering that we see on the news or even in any mainstream media, it can definitely work people down. So, I agree. I agree with him. So, what particular points did he make?
Yeah, it brought me in my memory a book I read in the mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It was a volcanologist, specialist of volcanoes,
Mm-hmm.
Arun Taziev, one of the worldwide specialists, who happened to be French, and he was named in the beginning of the 80s as the first environment minister of France. But he was not part of these circles of professional, let's say, environmentalists who are earning their money through scare tactics.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very dedicated defender of this planet, having dedicated his life in understanding the earthquakes and volcanoes. And in his book, that was titled, I remember, Is the Earth Going to Stop Turning? He pointed out, that I remember, three main problems that were tackled in the wrong way. And I can remember at the top of my mind two of them. The first one was the CFC problem. I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s, we were told that there was a layer on top of the Antarctica,
Mm-hmm.
ozone layer,
Yeah.
that was protecting us from very bad radiations coming from the sun. And this layer was being destroyed by artificial chemicals we were putting in our sprays.
Okay.
Okay. And well, in a laboratory, it is true that the CFC gases that we use to spray were destroying the ozone. Ozone is three molecules of oxygen together.
Yeah.
And if you break this bond, then you just get rid of the ozone. And these CFC molecules could do that, but at laboratory temperature. But what just he noted that in the upper atmosphere, where the ozone layer stands, the temperature is like minus 50, minus 60 degrees.
Right.
And in this case, if you bring the temperature to minus 60 degrees Celsius, the CFC cannot react with the ozone.
So it can't penetrate it.
It cannot do anything
to
at
diminish
this
it.
altitude.
Interesting.
So now his question was, why do we have so many international conferences that are trying to tackle the CFC problem, spending billions of dollars and banning the CFCs to replace them by other gases?
when
Why?
it's not relevant
When
at
it's-
certain temperatures.
Exactly. So he went a little bit further, asking who would benefit from this? Because he was saying we are facing major problems on this planet, pollution being one of them, and it's clearly man-made, destruction of inhabited, wildlife and etc. These are real problems.
Yeah.
How do we manage waste from our cities and things like that?
Yeah.
And this is where the effort could be tremendously benefiting the human population and the planet. But the billions are not there. The billions are fighting CFC gases that do not represent any danger to the ozone.
I agree completely. And I can't tell you enough how irritated I get walking in London, where I go a lot, as you know, for a lot of my projects, and I have to step on cigarette butts. Why are they allowing people to throw their cigarette butts everywhere? Any city that I go to, it's not just London. You walk anywhere and you have this problem. You go to Dubai, you go to Los Angeles, New York, any of the cities in Spain. It's really irritating that no one does anything about man-made pollution, as simple as that, which our kids and us have to face every day when we step outside our door. Yet, you're right, they're talking about CFCs and putting their billion-dollar fundings behind that.
Yeah, CFC now is a scare that has gone away. Nobody talks about it. And Arun Taziev explains very well that, in fact, the CFCs were invented by DuPont de Nemours, who is a big chemical company.
Yeah.
And they had licenses about this. So each time you would spray using this gas of propulsion, or you would make DuPont earn money. But at the end of the 70s, these patents were coming to an end for DuPont. So any students of chemistry could produce CFCs in his laboratory. And so it was a game from the big chemical industry to ban molecules that would be openly available and freely available, to patent other molecules to put in their sprays so that they could be patented.
Oh, God.
Okay.
There's always the money behind the cause.
Exactly. And this was my first call into, when there is an agenda that is worldwide driven,
There's always money with it.
try to look a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And whose benefit is always a good question,
Yeah.
And
So some companies always raking in a lot of money with the so-called humanitarian causes.
yes. And so Björn Lomborg on Joe Rogan begins, if I remember, by pointing the fact that plastics is a big problem, and we are being, overwhelmed by plastic waste, including the oceans. And we have devised solutions to recycle plastic, except these solutions are not smart, they are costly, and they are just a sham, because 90 to 95% of the plastic that would be isolated in a separate bin would anyway be burned and would not be recycled, because recycling plastic, it didn't go into much details, but it is true that when you see that this plastic can be recycled, if you go to a coffee shop and you have this mug that is recyclable, in fact, in 95% of the time, it's not possible to do it, because you have different types of plastic, different types of molecule. And when you want to recycle, you need to isolate. But sometimes you have several layers of different plastics that are stuck together. So you cannot separate them and recycle them. So at the end of the day, you burn everything. But we have devised solutions where we put a bottle in a can and we think that we are clean, right?
Yeah.
When in fact, at the end of the day, we will just burn everything. So he said it would be much more simpler to devise solutions that are not meant to make us feel good, but are really bringing real solutions to people. One of the biggest problems we face is the waste management in cities. And he said in Dhaka, so in Bangladesh, they devise a simple way of collecting the trash. Collecting the trash, putting the trash out of the life of people is the priority.
How are they doing it? Did he go into detail?
He didn't go into details, but he said their goal was to move the trash out of the life of people because it's disease-inducing.
Of course.
And it is a poor way of living.
Horrendous.
And then they burn everything.
Okay.
They just burn everything, because most of these waste, they are either metal or made out of fossil fuels,
But
like all
wouldn't
the
that
plastics.
damage air quality if we're burning all of our trash?
This was brought up by Joe Rogan.
Okay.
But Björn Lomborg said that we have solutions today with filters. We can filter most of the particles.
Yeah.
And it is always this extremist view that if we do something that brings a little bad, a lot of good, people are still arguing, don't do it because of this little bad.
Yeah.
And in anything, in any life, there is good and bad.
Right.
The point is really to maximize the good and minimize the bad, but we will never be perfect. And again, better is usually the enemy of good.
I mean, that makes sense to me. The greater good is always better than the marginal bad that you have to incur to get to the good.
Yes, then he goes into the climate change. Okay, so he's not someone who says there's no climate change. There is climate change, and one of the things that is always constant in climate, since we have historical data, right? The only thing that doesn't change in climate is change. Climate always changes,
Right.
okay? And we go through cycles of, cooling and warming.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, what is the influence of human behavior on this planet that is influencing the climate? Now we have models. Most models, and they are devised by people who believe that humans have an influence on the climate. But this it doesn't say that, but these models do not, for example, factor in the sun because it's too complicated. Okay, but fine. But we know that the sun is the major contributor to the warmth of this planet. If our planet were a few thousand kilometers closer to the sun, we would be just boiling.
Yeah.
And if it were a few thousand kilometers away from the
We'd
sun,
be freezing.
freezing. We
Yeah.
are just in a perfect distance. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you remove the sun and you emphasize the role of humans because all the parameters you input in your model is human driven, you will find garbage in, garbage out, basically. It doesn't say that way, that bluntly, but this is the case. And he says the models, they go from 50% human, influence on climate warming or change and to 100%. But he says, and people are interpreting all these models towards the 100%, which is probably, we can feel it's a little bit exaggerated, right?
Yeah.
So he says the thing is, in every venues in our world today, be it our health, be it the climate, be it our society, anything is thought of as a catastrophe. There is a kind of running towards what gives you the most feeling, the most. It's like, he doesn't say that again that way, but this is what I feel.
It
his
gets the
thought
biggest
is
reaction out of people.
reaction. So the
Yeah.
media is built on reaction,
Yeah.
and people, maybe it's a boring life and you need excitement.
Yeah.
So
So you need to feel panic once in a while, and you
Yes.
need to feel a sense of like fear.
And it is extraordinary, he says, because you take these models and imagine men are indeed contributing to warming the climate or the planet, okay? We are talking about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. And we are acting and panicking, and people are really panicking, as if the oceans are going to boil like in 10 years, right?
So what's the real story behind all this? Why are we made to feel this way? Why are people being pushed to get freaked out about the environment when really, when you look at the whole picture,
Well, it's as always, how do you mobilize people? So in the beginning of the 70s, but it started earlier, the Club of Rome had a plan to try to infuse this idea that the resources on this planet are limited and population growth is going to create a catastrophe. Okay, it's a Malthusian view. And if you read their documents, there are limits to growth, is one of the books they published in the beginning of the 70s. They say that in order to influence humans and our societies towards consuming less, you will need to create and use levers. And one of them was climate. Okay. It's very strange because in the 70s, what was really pushed is that we were going towards a new glacial age.
Yeah.
It was cooling, right? And then warming was put as a factor because I guess after the CFC problem and the ozone, people were very much concerned about the atmosphere. And so carbon dioxide was found to be a product of exhaustion of fossil fuels. And then we could use this to not only influence behavior and redirect dollars towards new industries and also justify, let's say, a Malthusian agenda, right?
Yeah.
And continue. And so it's using levers, exaggerating problems in order to mobilize people, in order to get their obedience. And in fact, when people are scared, it is very commonly known in global psychology studies, when people are scared, they can't think clearly.
That's true. So then they can be easily controlled. I mean, and every story tends to be so dire with the media, like COVID. It's so dire. If you don't, you die, type of thing. With the environment, it's so dire. If you don't act now, we will all die. This kind of story, at some point, will become like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Do you believe that at some point people will start becoming not so in tune to these kinds of calls to action, these panic attack calls to action?
I think it's always the case. There will be two reactions. If you as it seems to be, and there were some whistleblowers that are really saying that climate change and influence of humans on climate change is going to be the next horse that the media is going to push and to push and to push, right? But if you go this direction, you will have two reactions. I think people will get desensitized to the issue unless they are forced by their government to pay taxes, etc., or they will just react against it. Yeah. So
I often wonder in situations like this how much it really matters how the average person is going to react, because whatever they're going to push onto us, they're going to do irrespective. If it suits a certain strategy that they have, then it really doesn't matter whether we're in for the ride or not. If we're not on board, they're going to keep going.
Yes. And it's very interesting when you say they, who are they? Because you cannot say the scientists are part of this decision-making process. But
sometimes they toe the line just to line up with whatever the governmental strategies are. Usually tends to be a government or some sort of an authority body.
Absolutely. And I would say more than governments, the ones who control the money and the flow of money.
Yeah.
Because today, believe it or not, if you want to publish any scientific paper, if you want to have a chance to get funding for your research, you need to find a link to climate change caused by humans.
Yeah.
If you manage to do so, you will get funding. If you go against it, there's no way. You will be destroyed.
So right? How does this guy Bjorn Lomborg get heard if he's speaking a little bit of a different tune?
But he's not saying it's not true. He's trying to have a more balanced way without being too extreme in his rejection of the agenda.
He's treading carefully.
Yes, he's treading very carefully, willingly or not. I don't know. Okay. But I think he's a voice of reason. I think he's someone that people should listen to. He's doing tremendous work. People who are very afraid and get only one side of the equation can get more of the other side from a more, let's say, balanced person, accepted internationally, like Bjorn. That's interesting to hear his arguments and his very balanced way of seeing things. I don't know if he's really prudent and thinks otherwise, or if he really believes in what he's saying.
But I think he knows that he should be wise to be prudent.
Yes.
On a subject like this, because there's a lot of pressure from the other side.
That's true, and he would be cut out of the media anyway if he were too far on the other direction.
Unfortunately, yes, you get silenced if you go against the narrative, and if you have anything that's even evidence-based that you can present to them, you're going to be very hard pressed to get heard.
Yes, but he says things very interesting without taking head on the false problems, but he points them out. He also addresses real issues like we are saying, for example, that warming is very dangerous, and in the US, in a certain year, there has been a heat wave that killed 700 people. It's terrible.
Yeah,
and it's because it was a summer that was hotter than others, maybe 10 degrees more, whatever. But we never hear the media pointing out that 170,000 people in the US alone every year die because temperatures are too cold.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the means to warm themselves or their house. Yeah.
So why isn't that a crisis?
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
In fact, warming is much less dangerous than cooling.
Yeah.
We should be very afraid. And my thinking is that if we have a risk right now, it's really that the climate will change towards a cooling. If you look at history, we are really at a peak of warmth that existed in the past, the same levels. But after this peak, we always go into a glacial period.
So what's the problem? Why aren't they focused on the deaths to cold temperatures?
Because if you acknowledge, let's say, that we are going towards an ice age, it will take thousands and thousands of years. It's not tomorrow. But if we go towards in this direction, the only culprit would be the sun. And how do you edict any, let's say, society behavior if it's the sun?
Right.
You have to blame humans to put your agenda.
Because there's no recourse if it's the sun.
Exactly. There's nothing you can do except
Right.
prepare maybe and be smart and find solutions.
Therefore, it must lie on our shoulders, the
Yes,
burden.
but the point is that the climate being changed by humans is a pretext to put in place measures of control
Yeah.
of the society in order to, for example, you will not be able, this is the goal, you have a digital ID, and this digital ID will have some points, some allowance for CO2 emissions. And if you have exhausted your CO2 quota, you will be forbidden to, for example, buy gas for your car. So this is this transhumanistic way that you can control humans and their behavior. And climate change is one of the way you can achieve this goal as a pretext.
Are people aware? Do you think people are waking up to this kind of stuff? Do they understand that when people talk about, when their governments or the authorities are talking about climate change and calls to action, that there's actually a lot more behind that narrative than what they're letting us know?
I think there are signs everywhere for people to think about, but I think it will be more and more obvious to people who want to see.
And the majority will probably just toe the line, just like they have with every other so-called crisis
Yes,
that gets thrown upon us.
yes, so this is what you see in China, where you have a very strong social credit system
Yeah.
attached to a digital ID.
Yeah.
So it's not China, all of China, it's regions in China with governors doing these experiments. But
no one's really pushing back. It seems like they're just
well, no, it's not true,
lining
because
up.
when you talk to Chinese, a lot are against it.
But do they do anything about it? Do they push back? I think they're very hard pressed to not push back.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's very convenient. It's true that the 5G world, where you don't even need to have a phone on you, where all your wishes are like pre-fulfilled by intelligence, artificial intelligence, where you can pay very easily, when machines are learning your habits and trying to interact with you in a smart way. All of this is so appealing.
Yeah.
It's so convenient.
It's easy to fall into the trap of,
Yes,
this is a much better life, and they're telling me that I'm going to be better off this way.
Yes. And because you become lazy, and because you don't see, there is a saying in the Middle East, and it's proper to Damascus, where you have to follow the liar until the door of his house. All right. So all these tools of control, they are wonderful. They are very making our lives much easier. Get a Uber is fantastic. The problem is when these tools fall into the wrong hands. And are they devised at people who have good intentions or not? It's one question. Many people say no, some others say yes. The problem is the potential. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting to go through these things, but it's very hard because you have the same song everywhere in the media, and many people are ashamed or frightened to, even in public, even with friends, to speak their mind because you are all dismissed.
Because the majority of the people are brainwashed by slogans. The slogans are, if you don't do this, you will be worse off. If I don't want to go back into recent history, but a lot of the things that people were lining up to do without even asking any questions was quite problematic, and it was very difficult for those of us that were questioning. You're right, we were getting shut down. But then you've got slogans like, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And I think that's a conditioning as well that is leading us to all this digital ID, because eventually you will have no choices. You will be happy. Your life will be lived for you. All your hopes and desires are being tracked by your purchase behavior and by your activity behavior. And it will be presented right before you can even think about it.
Exactly.
So you're just going to keep living happily and staying out of our way so that they can do whatever they want to do.
Yes. And I think in every question, there's always different alternatives, different way of looking at questions. And it's important to keep an open mind. It's important not to be stuck into an ideology. In any question, look at the opposite view or a more balanced view. Try to understand where you could be wrong. Because being right, um, th- there is, I think it's Mark Twain maybe who said that it's not in what we are wrong that we get in trouble. It's when we think we are right and in fact we are wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So listening to such a podcast was interesting in bringing more air and more food for thought. Is maybe we can elaborate. He's talking about what is the main culprit in death on this planet. We're always talking about lead poisoning and all these pesticides, etc. But the main, and United Nations is pointing this out, the main culprit, the main cause of death on this planet is indoor cooking. It's the fumes that people produce, the poor people who can only get a fire indoor to cook their food or to get warmth.
Yeah.
They use cupboard.
So it's the fumes of the fires in
Yes,
these poor,
yes.
underprivileged areas where they have absolutely no choice but to build a fire inside their home
yes,
to cook and to stay
yes.
warm.
And it is estimated that this indoor cooking is the equivalent of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day.
And why isn't anyone talking about this? Why aren't people being alerted to this, and why aren't they being saved from this?
Because the agenda of the Club of Rome and people who are following this Malthusian agenda is to say that the problem is not so much providing clean energy to all the population. The problem is that energy basically is limited, so we cannot provide it to everyone, so let's have less population, right? When in fact, I think as a matter of decency of humanity, the first thing we need to do is to provide all these people in India, everywhere, electricity,
Yeah.
for example,
Yeah.
so that they can have heat and they can cook cleanly. This is absolutely monstrous. We could save so many million lives every year just doing this. And so now the question of energy, fossil fuels, right?
Yeah.
So burning all our trash would provide energy. We do it
And that
cleanly.
seems an easy
It is.
source of energy by burning the fuels, and so I'm envisioning almost like a furnace type of a
Yes, it is. It
setup
is.
where
It
you
is.
can get your energy
It
once
is, and
you burn your
reduce the
garbage.
yes, and you reduce the pollution to the maximum. It's already done. I mean, it's not a rocket science. And there's also the question of nuclear energy that is bringing up. It says it's the cleanest form of energy we can use.
And yet it's not being
It is being
entertained.
demonized.
Why?
In the name of, if there is an accident, and we saw the worst accident happened, it was Chernobyl in Ukraine. And Chernobyl, well, it was an accident, but it was an accident following, they were testing. It was a human error, if you want. Okay?
Yes.
They were testing the cooling capabilities, and there was a miscommunication, and it exploded.
So it wasn't exactly the technology itself. It was the way that it was implemented.
Yes, this technology was dangerous because you start a nuclear reaction and you need to cool it so that it doesn't go into explosion, right? Now we have better technologies to produce nuclear energy. It is a reaction that you start, but if you stop inputting some energy into the core, the reaction stops. So there's no risk of, so basically if you stop doing anything, the reaction stops. There's no more risk of exploding. And
So then if it's that foolproof, then what's the problem?
the problem is the ideology that people are staying with these wrong ideas about nuclear energy. We have the problem, of course, of waste of nuclear energy, but it's very small compared to what we can manage in other areas. And this Malthusian people are, and the media get funding only in catastrophic output and outlooks. Things are, fossil fuels are going to be lacking, for example. This is something we are hearing. So every decade, we are supposed to enter the decade in where fossil fuel is going to decline in production, right? There has never been more reserves proven of fossil fuels than today. And
So what's this? Why is this the story then?
the story is first, I think, for the gas companies to declare as less reserves as they can, because they pay taxes on their reserves. So if you discover a huge field of oil, you are not going to talk about it, otherwise
Yeah.
you will pay taxes.
Yeah.
But demonizing fuel and going into replacement, so-called alternative energies like solar or electricity that is produced naturally, yeah, like by wind, it's a way also to reduce the output and the capability, and to say, okay, this is the only electricity we can provide, and there's not for everyone. So we better start on reducing the population,
Yeah.
or at reducing the needs of the population, meaning that our way of life cannot be sustained.
Yeah.
It's true there are problems, exaggerations, but the level of comfort that we have when you open a tap and you have hot water, this should be available to any human. It should be part of a human right,
Yeah.
and should not be denied in terms of a scarcity that is just man-made. The scarcity itself is man-made in order to drive political agendas.
So it's never really about attaining peace and harmony, because there's no money in peace and harmony. If everybody was better off genuinely, if they were healthier, if they were happier, if they really were able to live the optimal life, that might be problematic for those that can make money in other ways.
Yeah. There was the Boston Consulting Group who was asked as a consultant to look at. It was a model of chronic disease, and I think it was about hypertension, diabetes, and they factored in their presentation, in their assessment, a pill that could cure the thing, and they said the introduction of such a pill would be a very bad business model. So if you want to extract wealth from people, you need to keep them sick and manage their sickness instead of curing them. Yeah. So this is falling
That's
into
not surprising. That's not surprising. When you go into a medical clinic, when you go for a checkup, you see automatically, the obvious questions aren't being asked, and some of the most ridiculous things that we're being put through when we visit a doctor is a completely different story. We can cover that, of course, another time. But this is very interesting. I would love to learn more about his work. What does he do, and is he full-time into the climate?
Yes, he calls himself let's say, not an anthropologue, but a sociologue of environment. So these people thinking about the environment, etc. He has several books. I think the latest is Cool It. It's about climate change. But one of the best way maybe to know him is to read The Skeptical Environmentalist, where he tries to articulate, everything that is true in this matter and everything which is exaggeration. And I think he does a good job there.
I love that title. Let's get that book.